Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're going to be answering the question of what joint should I be using for this particular application. Let's dive in. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of different joints out there. You could spend an entire lifetime and never even see them all, much less master them all. So with so many joints out there to pick from, how do you know which one is the best joint for this particular application? You really have to start to simplify and realize that a lot of the joints have a lot of things in common. And in reality, there are only 6 different joints, and some might break it down to 12 or 18 depending upon how you want to classify them. But if you can understand the basic geometry of things moving, you can understand which joint to use. There are 2 particular aspects you have to understand when connecting 2 boards together. Number 1 is grain direction. Are they coming together this way? Are they coming together this way? Or are they coming together this way? Really, once you understand the 3 different methods that wood can come together, you can start to understand the differences you're going to need for that. But number 2, there's also spatial considerations. In which way do you want to constrain them to move? We live in a 3-dimensional world, and so boards can move in any direction. A joint constrains that movement. So in a 3-dimensional world, there is an infinite number of directions that a board can move. So to make this a little bit simpler, we're going to constrain it down to 6 different directions. Forward and backward, up and down, left and right. And with those 6 different directions, we can start to understand how are we going to keep it from moving. Then the next thing you have to understand is what forces are going to be acting on this board to move it. Now we live here on Earth, which means we have gravity. So that means there's always going to be an act pulling it down. So most of the time, every joint is going to have something that constrains the board from moving down. If it doesn't, eventually gravity is going to pull it down. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, unless acted upon by an outside force. And when it comes to joinery, a lot of times you have to think about not only gravity, but who is going to be interacting with it, how are they going to be interacting with it, and how many kids are going to be jumping on top of it. Usually a piece of furniture starts with something that transfers all of the weight down to the ground. And often that is a leg in each corner or in the middle if the span is too big. I know once you start getting into modern, postmodern, there are no vertical lines and things go at different lengths, but you still have to understand that everything has to go down to the ground. Then you have to look at how is your top going to be on it? Well, the top is sitting on here, so gravity and the leg are constraining it in one direction. So with that in mind, let's look at a couple joints. Number 1, we have the butt joint. Hey! All we've done is we've constrained this in one direction. This board can still move up, down, front and back, and to the right, but it can't move to the left. It has one constraint. Pretty weak joint. Next, let's look at the rabbet. This is a ledge that a board can sit in. Now this has constrained it. It can't go down and it can't go over to the side, but it can still go to the other side, it can still go front and back, it can still go up. It is constrained in 2 directions, so slightly better than the butt joint, but still pretty loose joint. Next we can look at a groove, or in this case a dado. A dado goes across the grain, a groove runs with the grain. In this case I can slot a board into that groove, and this will constrain it. It can't move left and right, it can't move down. It can still move in and out, and it can still move up. So we've constrained half of the directions, 3 out of 6. Well, that's actually pretty good. Next we have a bridle joint. In this case, this board over here could move out, and it can move up. But it can't move over, it can't move up and down. It is constrained in 4 of the 6 directions. It still has 2 that it can move around, but 4 of the 6 is actually really good. Also gives you a lot of gluing surface. Next we have one of my favorites, the mortise and tenon. In this case it goes in, and this is constrained in all directions except for 1. It can't move in any 4 of these. It can't move that way because it has a shoulder. It only has 1 direction that it can move. 5 out of the 6. That's great, and that's why you see mortise and tenon is one of the most common ones. The problem with it is you still have that 1 direction. You normally fix that with glue or a pin, or in this case you can slide in a tusk into the tenon, and you can now constrain this so it can't move in any direction. So you have to ask yourself, if I'm putting these 2 boards together, in what directions is it important that I constrain it? Number 1, you have to think about gravity. How is gravity going to affect it? And you need to constrain it in that direction. You can't make a butt joint this way, otherwise gravity is just going to go whoop. It's not going to work. You also have to think about how is it going to be acted on. Are people going to be shifting this side to side? Is there going to be a lateral movement on it? You're going to need to constrain that. Or is someone actually going to be constantly pushing it back and forth? You're going to need a way to constrain that movement. So think about it in these 6 directions it can possibly go, and then pick the joint that can constrain it in those directions. The next thing to consider is the really scary one. Wood movement. Will my project explode? I have a lot of videos on wood movement, but basically if you can understand one thing, you can understand wood movement. Wood expands and contracts across the grain. Just like fingers in the grain, they can expand and contract this way. But you can't pull your fingers longer. Boards don't expand and contract lengthwise. They only expand and contract across the grain. So this board will get wider or shorter over time. Now, that's also comparative to how thick it is. It will expand and contract this way, but because there isn't much wood here, it's not going to expand and contract much at all. And most of the time, you can constrain that movement very easily. But this being about 6 inches wide, it's going to expand and contract a lot more in this direction. You may or may not be able to actually hold that expansion and contraction together. It may end up busting apart whatever joint it's in. So if I grab 2 boards and I put them together this way, I don't have to worry about expansion and contraction much because they're both going to expand and contract together. This board will get wider at the very same rate that this board gets wider. And so expansion and contraction is not something I have to think about in this direction. But if I turn the board this way, uh-oh, I got a problem. This board will not grow longer, but this board will grow wider. So this board will want to move when this one doesn't. So I have to have something that allows the movement and doesn't constrain it in that direction, but yet still holds it so that this board doesn't move around. And with those concepts, you know everything you need to know to choose the right joint. Number 1, the direction that the wood is connecting. Is it cross grain connection or is it long grain to long grain connection? Number 2, which direction do you need to constrain it? There are 6 different directions you can constrain, and there are 2 different orientations of wood, so there are a total of 12 different joints in this world. And every single joint in the world fits into one of those 12 considerations. Okay, I can see the comments coming. Yes, I know. There are more directions than 6. We live in a 3-dimensional world, so that means there's an infinite number of directions and an infinite orientation of one board to the other, so there are infinite number of joints. But yeah, we're not living in a black and white Boolean world. We are living in an analog world where there are deviations between one direction and another. So take it with a grain of salt. There are going to be some exceptions to that. If it's at 45 degrees, does that make it a cross grain connection or a long grain connection? In that case, it's a little of both. So take it into consideration. Realize it's going to have half the expansion of normal, but it's still going to have some expansion. So things to think about. Some things don't need a lot of constraint. This bench top is only held on by gravity. There are a couple pins holding it in place so that it can't slide around. It is constrained in the 4 directions, but nothing is constraining it up because this is heavy enough, gravity is going to hold it down. The stretcher here, going through this leg, I want to make sure that doesn't move around at all because there's going to be a lot of lateral force in this bench. As I'm planing and sawing, it's going to be moving all over the place. So we have a mortise and tenon. It's constrained in 5 of the 6 different directions. And then we have a pin going through it. So now it can't even go out that way. This one is constrained in every direction, making it one of the strongest possible joints you could have. You don't always need that strength, but when you do, you want to try and put it all in there. Every one of these joints is the exact same joint. They all have different names. Finger joint, regular dovetail, houndstooth dovetail, bohemian dovetail, through dovetail, nap joint, sunrise dovetail, inlaid dovetail. They all do the exact same thing. They constrain these 2 boards in 5 of the 6 directions. So that the only way they can come apart is the dovetails sliding out the end of the pins. Gravity wants to pull one board against the other. Well, the dovetails aren't going to let it happen. The person pulling on the front of the drawer is going to want to pull this board off of that. Well, because the dovetails are wider at this end than this end, it won't come out. Now, yes, I know the finger joint is actually slightly less because it only constrains in 4 of the 6 and it can pull out, but that's why we use glue. And then a lot of people say, what about Japanese joinery? Because that's really fancy and very hard. And Japanese joinery is exactly this. It's usually the combination of 2 joints together, or if you have a 3rd board coming together at the same point, you may have a mortise and tenon that goes through a mortise and tenon. It's still the exact same joinery, it's just more of it in one spot. Every joint out there is just a rethinking of these basic principles. You don't need to know all the joints. You just need to know how does this particular joint constrain the wood. There are a lot of people out there who tell you for application X, you have to use joint Y. Yes and no. You don't have to. It's used most commonly because that's what's useful. Dovetails are really, really common on drawers. They constrain in all the directions they need to be constrained, and the drawer casing holds it on for the last of the 6 directions. On top of that, the boards all expand and contract together, so they work together. And so that's why dovetails are almost always used on drawers. I mean, yes, you can do just a simple butt joint. You could do a rabbet joint, but doing a dovetail gives you that constraint in all different directions. I could make an incredibly long list of, for application X, use joint Y, for application Z, use joint D. And honestly, that would be life's work. I could even go through the 10 most common joints, but those ones are pretty obvious, like the dovetail for the drawer. But I would rather teach the why than the how. I could be the instructor that tells you, you do this every time, but I don't tell you why. I would rather explain why you do it so that you can think through it on your own and make the decision that works best in that particular application. Because who knows, there might be a dresser where the drawers are on their side. Well, now gravity's not constraining this board. I might want to do something different there. So you need to think through the particular application of your design to find the right joint for your joinery. When push comes to shove, don't overthink it. There is no right joint for a particular application. And if something does break in the future, you're a woodworker. You can fix it. You can remake it. You can learn from that and try something different next time. If you really want to go into it, every single joint on this bench I have an entire video for, because that's how all of these came about. A lot of them are live videos where I actually take it step by step. The window here, I actually have 2 of those, and there's 9 different joints, and that's 9 different videos. So there is a lot of information out there on how to make any one of these and what exactly is that joint used for. How does it constrain things? How does it hold them together? There are no rights and wrongs to this. There are often ways that are better than others for particular applications, but every application is different. Every woodworker is different, and so every joint is going to be different. Have some fun, experiment, try new things, and relax. So there you have it. I hope you like this. I know there are going to be lots of questions about, well, I have this particular application, which joint should I use? And throw those in the comments down below. I'll try and answer them. If you want to send me an email, you can do that with pictures, and I can actually guide you through some of that, because in some cases there are ways to learn from what others have done, and in some cases it's just better to learn doing it yourself. So have a little bit of fun, experiment, try new things, throw comments down below. That does help out the channel. Thank you for that. That means a lot. Anytime you hit like, share, subscribe, and you comment down below, you are helping this channel. Thank you. That helps us get in front of more people, it helps the channel grow, and it does keep us going here. If you want to take it one step farther, there are a bunch of people scrolling over here on the side. They are the patrons on Patreon. They are the ones who are literally keeping us going. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewer. Without sponsors on Patreon or people who've clicked the little join button, this channel wouldn't be here. So thank you for that. If you like the content and you'd like to keep it going, think about doing that. There is more information for that down in the description below, or you can click the little join button. We do have special perks for both patrons and members, and thank you. On that note, I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. The 3rd most common search term for my channel is how to roll a joint. I generally cut them. I don't normally roll them. Usually, a piece of furniture is going to